Britain's baby boom generation is growing old. In just 20 years' time, 1 in 5 of us will be aged 65 or older. Two of the greatest challenges facing our ageing society are osteoarthritis and Alzheimer's disease, conditions that have devastating consequences for both the sufferers and for those closest to them.
There's estimates between 24 and 28 million people worldwide with Alzheimer's disease, and the estimates in Ireland are about 40,000. And I think what makes it an even more pressing problem, it's really a disease of the elderly. So as the population life expectancy continues to increase, so will the incidence of Alzheimer's disease.
Using the latest cutting-edge techniques in stem cell therapy and protein analysis, Irish scientists are edging ever closer to finding a cure that will once and for all help win the fight against these dreadful diseases.
For so many people in later years, their quality of life is severely compromised by osteoarthritis. And absolutely the most exciting thing for us is that stem cell therapy could potentially provide a remedy for this disease.
Hilda Barrett suffers from osteoarthritis, an extremely painful and debilitating disease that can affect up to 50% of people over 50. It's caused by abnormal wearing of the cartilage that covers and acts as a cushion inside joints. It's the most common form of arthritis and the leading cause of chronic disability in the world. Professor Frank Barry, Scientific Director of the REMEDI Institute in Galway, has been interested in this disease since his student days.
When I was working as a postdoctoral researcher in London many years ago and I began to learn about this disease, I was amazed by the fact that it's such a devastating condition. It affects so many people, and yet there are no treatment options other than joint replacement surgery, which is a pretty serious option.
Six years ago, Hilda suffered a fall when she was on holiday with family in Spain. She was subsequently diagnosed with osteoarthritis in her left hip and underwent replacement surgery. However, 5 months ago, Hilda suffered a similar collapse, and it has now been determined that she has the disease in her right hip. She's now dependent on her daughter, Charmaine, as she awaits her next operation.
I had a good life. I've had 2 jobs. I was able to go everywhere on my own. I never needed help from anyone. I get so sore. You're sore when you're standing, you're sore when you're sitting, you're sore when you're lying down. It's unreal now, I'm not kidding you. Anyone that ever suffered with it, they know.
Hilda is a patient of Bill Curtin, who's a leading joint replacement surgeon based in Galway.
The basis of osteoarthritis is a disease which arises from the loss of articular cartilage from the surface of a load-bearing joint. Now, articular cartilage is a soft, spongy tissue which is ideal for load bearing. It's capable of deforming under pressure, and that distributes the load over a wide area. If you look at these 2 pelvic x-rays, they're obviously of different patients. The most important difference here is that if you look at the head of the femur here, we see a nice, smooth hemispherical outline with a well-defined joint space between the 2 bones. And this joint space represents the thickness of articular cartilage. If we look over to this x-ray, we can see while the head of the femur kept a reasonably spherical outline, we see that the joint space itself has been completely eroded. In this situation, we have complete erosion of the cartilage, and bone is touching against bone in the joint. And this is what causes the symptoms of painful osteoarthritis.
Like, I always had done my own housework. and they'd have to play spotless when they come home, whatever. But no, I can't even bend down to brush the floor or pick up anything dustpan. Or my grandchild, she was on 2 yesterday, got herpes, and she's putting her hands up to me. But if I go to pick her up, I can't do it. It's not going to get better. I'm going to be in this pain all the time. So why can't I get a hip to get me out of the pain?
As Hilda undergoes her second hip operation, specialists like Curtin are keen to find an alternative remedy to the disease.
Surgery represents the final step for a patient. Okay, when everything else hasn't worked for them, they maybe then feel compelled to looking towards a surgical solution. But I think everybody would prefer to avoid surgery if at all possible, because surgery is invasive. It exposes patients to risk. For example, with hip replacement, there's a 5% risk rate, which would include things like venous clotting and clotting that can move from the veins to the lungs, called pulmonary embolism.
While surgery is currently the only possible solution for Hilda's condition, Frank Barry and his team at REMEDI have been looking at innovative and non-invasive ways of attacking the disease, in particular by focusing their studies on one unique cell type. Human cells are the building blocks of life. There are over 200 specialised cell types that carry out specific tasks all over the body, such as forming cartilage in the joints. Frank's area of expertise involves a very special cell type, the stem cell. Unlike other cell types, stem cells are unprogrammed and have no characteristics which identify them as belonging to a particular tissue. What Barry is trying to achieve is to program these stem cells and instruct them to carry out normal cell function in a given area.
There are two sources of stem cells. The first of these is the embryo, and this is generally early stage embryos that have been generated for the purposes of in vitro fertilization. The second is postnatal or adult tissues, and we can isolate stem cells from a number of different tissues, in particular the bone marrow. At this point in time, we work exclusively with adult stem cells. We don't work with embryonic stem cells. The point about adult stem cells is they're more limited in the applications that we can look at. But there are some very exciting possibilities in terms of using adult stem cells to treat some major diseases. And these would include diseases of the musculoskeletal system, and in particular, osteoarthritis.
Osteoarthritis is a failure to repair the joint tissues that have been damaged. Barry wondered whether the stem cells in patients who suffer from the condition might be different to those in healthy individuals.
So we carried out some research projects where we isolated stem cells from osteoarthritis patients, and we compared them to stem cells from patients with healthy joints. And to our surprise, we found that the stem cells from the osteoarthritis patients were really quite defective compared to stem cells from individuals with healthy joints. And that led us then to think, what if we delivered stem cells to these osteoarthritis patients, whether we could in fact impact the progression of the disease?
He and his team carried out a series of animal studies where they injected stem cells into the arthritic knee joints of goats. The results were dramatic. A significant repair response was found in the knee joints that were treated with the stem cells.
What you see here is the tissue from a joint with osteoarthritis. Here's the cartilage and here's the bone. And you can see how the cartilage is eroded very seriously in this joint. When we look at what stem cells can do, here's what we see. This is an osteoarthritic joint treated with stem cells. In this case, the cartilage is fully intact and fully protected, and there's no evidence of damage in this joint after stem cell treatment compared to this joint which didn't receive stem cell treatment. And this is why we're so excited about what stem cells can do for this disease. Having validated the safety of stem cell therapy, the next step for us is to determine whether this therapy is effective in treating osteoarthritis in humans. And so our plan is to initiate a clinical trial involving the delivery of these cells to patients with osteoarthritis.
Frank is now collaborating with Bill Curtin, bringing together scientific and clinical practices that will provide the best opportunity for a successful human trial.
Frank is a scientist with great expertise and background in stem cell treatment. What I've been impressed with is the realisation that Frank and the team have that these stem cells are going to be most effective when they're applied into clinical situations. We're obviously at a very early stage in the development of these trials, but it's something that we look forward to developing over the coming months and years.
While we're in the middle of a research project and we still have a long way to go, nonetheless, we're optimistic, even very confident, that this research will work.
Over 25 million people are currently afflicted by Alzheimer's disease, and this number may double by 2050. Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia, or loss of brain function, and is generally diagnosed in people over 65 years of age. By studying the development of this devastating disease, UCD's Professor Dominic Walsh hopes to find ways of providing successful treatment to patients.
Prior to the late 1960s, Alzheimer's disease wasn't given particular importance. So it's only been really since the late 1960s it's emerged that so many people are affected by Alzheimer type dementia that there's been a real rush to investigate what's the molecular basis. And what we believe is that it's not so much about actual death of neurons, but it's about neurons losing their ability to carry out their normal activities. So when I say neurons, I mean brain cells. So brain cells communicate to each other, and we believe that's how we both make memories and recall memories. And the idea is that if the communications between the cells aren't as effective as normal, then our ability to make and recall memories is lost. Well, I think when you think about nerve cells, you have to think of them trying to make connections with other nerve cells. And it's somewhat similar to mobile phones, where we have multiple signals going to different people at different times, and you can talk to more than one person. You can hang up in conversation with one person and then go in and connect to another person. So we have this spontaneity of sending and receiving of messages, and that's really the way nerve cells interact with one another and transmit the fundamental principles of memory. We think what happens in Alzheimer's disease is that there's a problem in either sending the messages or receiving the messages, and that is the most basic part of the dysfunction that really leads to Alzheimer's.
We first really thought it was just somebody who was getting older, and little things like leaving taps running, you know, forgetting to turn taps off. Things that were actually quite unusual for Daddy, forgetting numbers or people's names. Then that kind of progressed. There was one evening we were all here in the front room, and we had the television on here, and Daddy actually thought that the program, I can't remember what program was on, but he thought that it was actually real. So there was a definite crossover then between what was real and what wasn't. So that's when we really knew that there was something severely, you know, wrong.
Paddy Dooley was diagnosed with Alzheimer's a year ago and is now cared for by his wife Rachel and daughter Nicola.
Within about a year, really, he just declined very, very rapidly. From somebody who was always been extremely active physically and mentally. He's 77 now, and up until about a year ago was extremely active, both physically and mentally, to becoming totally incapacitated the way he is now. So it was very, very quick. Well, I've lost part of my father already, in a sense, you know, because part of him is gone, you know, and is unfortunately irretrievable. Daddy's always been a very proud man and was always a great performer. He ran away from home when he was 14 to join the travelling fit-up shows. His main thing was interaction with people, and I think that's why he got involved. He started up a variety group here when we moved to Portmarnock first, and then started up the old folks as well too when we moved here, because he is that kind of person and he loves that interaction with people. So it's very difficult to see that that type of interaction has gone, not just for us as a family, but for the community as a whole.
Walsh believes the answer to finding a treatment to Alzheimer's may lie in the behaviour of one single tiny protein in the brain, a protein that every single one of us produces. It's known as amyloid beta.
Proteins are produced and the body has a way of identifying when their job is done and to remove them. And what we think happens in Alzheimer's disease is that the amyloid beta protein is produced and it accumulates. There's either a defect in the amount of it's produced or in its removal. It accumulates the concentration that allows A-beta molecules to stick together. And when the A-beta molecules stick together and move around the brain, they can interact with neurons in different parts of the brain and perturb their normal function.
In order to acquire a better insight into the protein, it's necessary to look at how its structure changes as it accumulates in the brain.
The actual A-beta molecule, you can think of it as a little Lego brick. It's sitting there as an individual little molecule, not doing any harm. And all of a sudden it finds another Lego brick and someone pushes it together. That's some chemical event in the brain. You get that's your dimer. Then another Lego brick gets pushed on, that's your trimer. Now you have a molecule that's much bigger and it has different properties. And that's very much the way we think of the difference between A-beta monomer and these dimers and trimers. These dimers and trimers are bigger and they have new properties and they can affect neurons in different ways.
Normally, the brain deals with and dispenses with the early stage formation of beta amyloid dimers and trimers. In the case of Alzheimer's disease, the brain cannot disperse these dimers and trimers and they begin to self-associate and stick, forming new structures that begin to interfere with the messaging system, leading to the early signs of the disease. They will eventually form into larger structures known as amyloid plaques, causing the complete breakdown of the messaging system, resulting in the later stages of Alzheimer's. Walsh decided to focus on how these dimers and trimers of amyloid beta interact with the brain cells, resulting in the disturbance of the memory process. It was in this area that they made their major breakthrough, a success recognised by the publication of their investigation in the peer-review journal Nature Medicine in June 2008.
We set out to try to understand the different assembly forms of A-beta that actually exist in the human brain. And so we obtained brain samples from the brain bank here in Dublin, and we analysed them, and we found that in Alzheimer brains that we could detect unique dimers and trimers that were absent in non-Alzheimer brains. And then we took those dimers and trimers and we performed a variety of different biological assays, and we found that the dimers and trimers actually could interfere with a normal brain cell function.
The next stage was to ascertain if these dimers and trimers would actually affect a living brain, and so they were injected into rats.
So the rats were trained to do a specific task. Then immediately after they had been trained to do the task, some of this material was injected into their brain, and then the rats were tested first 1 day and then 2 days later to see if they could recall the task. And at 2 days later, they had almost completely lost the ability to recall the task.
These results proved hugely significant, as it shifted interest away from the later stages of amyloid beta accumulation in the brain on which scientific work had previously been focused.
For many, many years, people thought it was these large assemblies that were actually causing the disease. And what our data shows is that these large assemblies may have adverse effects, but it's the small assemblies that actually have the earliest effects on memory and learning.
Professor Michael Farrell, a neuropathologist based in Beaumont Hospital, has taken a keen interest in Walsh's findings.
This is a piece of brain tissue taken from a patient with long-standing Alzheimer's disease. These brown blobs are large aggregates of amyloid. For years, we thought that these big blobs of amyloid damaged nerve cells beside them. We know now that's not the case. This is, if you like, the end game. The damage has all been done, and what Dominic has shown was that the soluble form of the amyloid, which you can see here, accumulates in the brain, diffuses through the brain, and damages the synapses.
We reasoned that really, if we have an A-beta monomer and it ends up in this huge assembly of this plaque in the brain, that if we can keep it at the A-beta monomer stage and don't allow it to move towards the bigger assembly stage, that might provide a good therapeutic treatment. And that's what we're really focusing on. We're trying to develop small molecules and antibodies that will really reverse the formation of the large assembly so that we only have the A-beta monomer.
Walsh's work to date now offers dramatic and genuine hope to those diagnosed at the early stage of the disease.
What our results would suggest in terms of the small A beta assemblies is that they have an impact upon memory and normal neuronal function, but they don't kill neurons. So I think that's really exciting news in that we've been able to show that this is a reversible process. And if we can take these small assemblies away, the brain cells will recover their former activity.
The real holy grail of Alzheimer's research is to develop that reliable biomarker that predicts the inevitable development from a really early stage. Because if we can identify the disease at its very earliest stage, then there's some hope of intervening and preventing the accumulation of the protein and in turn the damage to nerve cells. So it's the early detection reliably with a biomarker that we can trust. And I think through Dominic's work that the soluble A beta, be it in spinal fluid or in blood, will be that predictable or predictive biomarker.
Well, I think it's fantastic that there is this ongoing research, and I think it's vitally important because I think statistically that, you know, that this unfortunate disease is going to be much more prevalent in the next 20 or 30 years, and I think nearly everybody will know somebody who will be suffering with some form of dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever it may be, you know, so I think it's going to afflict an awful lot of people in the future, but in Daddy's case, I think unfortunately it's just a little bit too late.
Access to brain tissue is crucial for the continuing success of Walsh's work and that of other investigators in this field. The Dublin Brain Bank will allow scientists access to precious human brain samples.
In order to look at what's going wrong in the brain, you have to be able to see what's going on in a normal situation when things are going right. So it's important to get healthy people to donate their tissues, as well as people who've suffered from neurodegenerative diseases, so that you can compare the two and see where things are going wrong. And that's where we come in. If people donate their brains to medical science, then researchers are going to have more access to that information.
Well, the brain bank is essential to all of our work because if we don't have diseased and normal brains to look at, we'll never be able to get the amyloid proteins extracted from the diseased brains to study their effects. So it's very important, not just for Alzheimer's disease, but for other neurodegenerative disorders such as Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, ALS. Over the time I've been involved in Alzheimer's disease, I've witnessed many great strides in our understanding of the molecular mechanisms of the disease. We really now have a much clearer picture of what the disease process is, and we can start to design molecules that will become drugs and really help millions of people who have the early forms of Alzheimer's disease. But we've got to a stage where we need an infusion of funds to help us get over that last hurdle. So very much as in every other facet of life, what we put into this process will be reflected in what we get out.
One of the great success stories of modern times is the increasing number of people living into old age. However, this triumph may yet prove to be our single biggest challenge. Irish investigators across a range of disciplines are facing that challenge as they search for new ways of treating some of the devastating diseases that threaten the benefits of our increasing longevity.